Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Niklas Kunkel. I'm from MakerDAO, and I'm the Oracle's core unit facilitator. I want to talk to you guys today about something I came up with called community consortiums. And like everything else in the space, right, they're something familiar, but they're also different. And I think the way that they're different makes them fundamentally different to what they're based off of. And I think the way that I want to do this is I kind of want to start with 3 stories. So I want to tell you about like 3 different kind of scenarios that come up in crypto a lot. There's certainly other ones, and you know, we could be up here all day and talk about dozens of different ones, but these 3 are just kind of examples. And so as I'm talking about these 3 stories, I want you to kind of think about what are the underlying trust assumptions that are happening in each of these stories. So, story number 1. Imagine a blockchain that has validators. And these validators decide, you know, which transactions are included in a block. The validators, you know, decide and reach consensus on if a block is valid or invalid. And the nodes on this network, you know, decide what is the canonical chain by looking at the chain which has the most blocks. Right, so this is known as like a Nakamoto kind of longest chain rule. Okay, story number 2. You have a oracle, right? So the oracles are the way that you get data off chain, right, on chain. Right, typically, right, you see this in DeFi, right, where an oracle, you know, represents the price of some kind of asset, right? So if you're a DeFi protocol and you're generating loans, right, you need to know what is the value of the collateral so you can make sure that the loan is sufficiently collateralized, right? So how does that oracle work, right? Well, typically there's some kind of price kind of submitter, right? So someone who submits the price, right? And typically it's not even like one person submitting the price, right? It's a group, right? And we say that this is some kind of like distributed consensus, right? Oh, we have 20 people, we have 30 people, right? You know, submitting this price, right? And we take, I don't know, the median, or we take the average, right? Or we do some kind of outlier analysis, or we take a TWAP, right? But the point is, there's a group, and it reaches some kind of consensus around what a price is. And then story number 3, think of a DAO. So a DAO that, you know, with your token, right, you can vote, but the vote is a snapshot vote. Right? And these are very popular, right? Because they don't require, right, you know, users to pay transaction fees, and we think this is very, very inclusive, right? Because no one is, blocked out from participating in governance, right? We've removed all the cost barriers to participating in governance. So the token holders, right, they vote on governance proposals via the snapshot vote, and then typically you have a developer team, right, that has some kind of multisig, and they then execute the transactions that were, represent the proposals that were ratified by these snapshot governance votes, right? But it's important to note here, right, it's the multisig, right, that has control of the smart contracts, right? And so today I want to convince you of 3 different things. The first is I want to convince you that from all these 3 stories I just told you, they're exactly the same. They're not different in the slightest. They work on the exact same mechanism. Second thing I want to convince you is that this is absolutely terrible, and we need to, we can't keep doing this. I mean, this is, in light of recent events, which we'll talk about later, right, it's just showing flaws and cracks, and we can do so much better. And then the third thing I want to convince you is that, well, actually, it's not that bad. It's just being misused. And that if you use it in a different way, it actually becomes a really, really powerful primitive that not only is not that bad, but like you actually do want to use it because it's so useful. So, first thing I want to convince you of, everything is a multisig. And as soon as you accept this great truth into your life, you start to see them everywhere. So every application you look at, every mechanism design is around this multi-sig type of concept, right? In the blockchain story, right? You have a bunch of validators and some subset of these validators, right? A subset of the signatories of a multi-sig are reaching some kind of decision, are reaching consensus, right? In the Oracle story, you have some subset of this, signatory set that we call the price submitters, and they decide that, this subset decides this is the price, right? In the last story, right, you have a multi-sig, right, that's actually has all the administrative authority over this crypto protocol, right, that's executing all of these state changes, right? It's literally a multi-sig. And so you see this mechanism everywhere, right? And I mean, this is just, what the hell are we doing, right? This goes kind of against the entire ethos of crypto. And like, what is the ethos of crypto? Like, the ethos of crypto is that, look, we have this incredibly useful, decentralized, neutral platform to build on top of, and we have the ability to make trustless applications, right? This idea that code is law, right? And users don't have to trust external parties, right? You just trust, the code as written, right? And we believe that we can get this kind of mechanical, deterministic behavior, right? And then what do? We don't do that, right? Like, the whole reason for crypto in the first place, right? The whole reason that Satoshi Nakamoto even came up with, right, Nakamoto consensus was exactly because of the 2008 financial crisis, right? And what happened? Well, there was our public institutions failed us, our private institutions failed us, there was a breach of trust, and we ended up bailing out all of these institutions, right? It's fundamentally unfair. And so then we look at crypto, right, and we tell ourselves, right, that no, right, the reason we're building is because so we don't have to trust institutions like that, right? The reason we're building is so we can get rid of this trust component. And then you look at events that happened recently, right, and you realize we're exactly the thing that we despise, right? We saw recently, right, a bunch of the CDFI kind of platforms failing, right? The collapse of UST kind of triggered a bunch of these CDFI lenders, to go insolvent, right? So you look at something like Celsius, right? Celsius promised its users, right, that, hey, you can deposit your tokens with us, and we'll give you some yield, and we're not doing anything risky, we're being super safe, right, and we're giving you the yield. What was Celsius doing, right? They were engaging in extremely risky investment activities, unbeknownst to their users. You look at, and this is not unique to Celsius, right? You look at Voyager, same exact thing. You look at BlockFi, same exact thing. You look at Nexo, same exact thing. They were all essentially participating in this fraud, right? And they all brand themselves as we are crypto native institutions, but no, they're the exact parallel of these fraudulent traditional finance institutions, right? That we say, you know, that we're different, but we're really not. And what happened, right? Well, Celsius went bankrupt, but you look at some of the other ones, and you're like, oh well, you know, they're still around. Well, what happened? Well, FTX bailed them out, right? FTX extended them hundreds of millions of dollars in credit, so they would have the liquidity to withstand a bank run, right? Without that bailout, without this, you know, repeat of exactly what happened in 2008, all of those institutions would have gone under. They would have needed to, in the bankruptcy proceedings, they would have needed to liquidate all of those holdings to pay back their creditors. And, you know, if you want to imagine what that means to have billions of dollars of crypto just kind of dumped on the market, like it means a bloodbath, right? It's like financial Armageddon. So, you know, Satoshi Nakamoto is probably rolling around in his grave, like watching this unfold, right? So, I've probably, you know, made things sound pretty bad, right? Like I'm here like a doomsayer, like preaching in front of you that things are terrible and we suck and we should all be very ashamed of ourselves. But I want to introduce you to this concept of community consortiums. And when I explain it to you, like you're going to be like, this is so simple. It's really stupid. Like this is not novel at all. But it's still really powerful. So imagine this multisig, right? And so when it's a small multisig, or when the number of signatories, when the number of validators, when the number of price submitters, right, is small, you have this centralization of power, right? You have, from a mechanism point of view, right, you've inserted this trust element. But I want to make the case that there is an inflection point, that once this signatory set, once this validator set, once this price submitter set becomes sufficiently large, that instead of being a trust adding mechanism, it's actually a trust reducing mechanism. And so the reason why I call it a community consortium is because essentially you want to onboard everyone in the community, every possible stakeholder, in order to reach consensus, and have this consensus essentially be a public good. And what you do at this point is any kind of application that is dependent on this community consensus, you're essentially betting on the industry not to decide to murder itself, which I think you'll find is a bit of a ludicrous, right, assumption. So I want to kind of briefly go into like how we're using community consortiums at Maker today, and then how we kind of want to develop them in the future, and then how all of you can be a part of this, right, and help kind of secure our applications and secure our ecosystem and secure our communities and secure our tokens. So Maker's oracles today work based on a community consortium. So I don't know if you've ever like thought of this, like, so if you're using DAI or using Maker, right, what are you trusting right now? You are trusting a community consortium. And I'll kind of go, in a little bit, I'll kind of go into like who exactly is in that consortium and who are you trusting, but you are trusting a consortium for all of the oracle prices in Maker. Later this month, we're going to be releasing what we call Maker Teleport. Maker Teleport is essentially a bridge from any chain to any chain. And so essentially, what do you need here? Well, if a user wants to, say, transfer their DAI from Ethereum to Optimism, right, you need to have some kind of consensus that something happened on one chain, right, so you can affect some kind of action on another chain. Right, so if a user, if a user burns their DAI on Ethereum, right, there needs to be some validator consensus that then tells, Maker on Optimism, hey, give this user, some new freshly minted DAI, right? If someone on Starknet, right, wants to transfer DAI to Arbitrum, right, you need consensus that some event happened on Starknet, right, that a user burned their tokens, right, in order to then trigger the minting of the DAI on the other chain. And kind of what's really cool about this mechanism is it actually, and kind of what makes this bridge unique versus other bridges, is one, it uses the same community consortium consensus as the oracles that Maker uses. So there's no extra trust assumptions that you're making, right? There's no compounding trust assumptions. It's just the same exact trust assumption that already exists today. But more importantly, this lets you kind of avoid this 1 week kind of exit delay that you have when it comes to rollups, right? So if you're like, if you have some ETH or some tokens on Optimism or on Arbitrum or on Starknet, right? When you try to exit, that chain, right? There is a dispute period, right? That has to happen, right? And typically, I think this is 1 week, right? But that parameter is kind of dynamic, right? And in that 1 week, if there was any kind of fraud, right? Someone is supposed to be able to submit a fraud proof on layer 1, right? Asserting that, this transaction is fraudulent, and that's why you have to wait this 1 week period. But what you can really do is essentially, because Maker has the ability to mint DAI, what Maker can do is essentially underwrite that risk if it knows the transaction is not fraudulent. So you can, if a user wants to withdraw, say some DAI off of Optimism, okay, normally they'd have to wait a week, but instead what they can do is the community consortium can look at that transaction that happened on Optimism. It can run the transaction on its own and verify, each individual in the community consortium can verify, hey, yeah, that transaction is legit. And then once you have enough of consensus reached, right, that this is a legitimate transaction, right, Maker can just go ahead and mint you the DAI on the other chain that you want to exit to. And essentially what you're doing then is after the 1 week delay, Maker gets the actual DAI, right, that you exited, right, from that 1 week challenge period, right, and then we destroy it, right, so the accounting nets out to 0. So it's like a really interesting way, I think, to avoid some of the UX challenges of roll-up chains, while not actually giving any additional risk or any additional types of fees to the user, right? It's just Maker underwriting this risk, right, that the transaction is fraudulent, right? And like I said before, right, there's no additional trust assumptions that Maker is making, right? So if the community consortium is corrupt, right, Maker was already screwed to begin with. So, so what is this community consortium that I've been talking about, right? I've been talking about it in abstract terms, right, as this nebulous kind of group, but who is it today? So it's all of the ones that you see up there. This community consortium is not new. We have had this effectively since the launch of multi-collateral DAI, which was about, what, 2.5 years ago at this point, right? So big thank you to all of like the OG partners, right, that are part of this consortium. But this is not good enough, right? I talked about at the beginning, right, this theoretical inflection point of like, oh, you have a small validator set, right? This sucks. This is just a multisig versus you have an extremely large validator set. Right now it's a community consortium. This is not yet a community consortium. This is not representative of enough of the stakeholders in this industry. Like to build an actual community consortium, which I don't think a single one exists yet today, you really need to get everyone, right? You need to get everyone's reputation. It's almost like staking your reputation, right, as a protocol, right? To participate in a community consortium and then to, you know, potentially, right, commit some kind of malicious action, right, that reflects on you as a protocol, right? But even more so, right, the challenge of getting a getting consensus around a malicious action becomes a coordination problem, right? It's how many people in this validator set can you convince to be malicious with you? And I would argue that if you can get every single reputable protocol, every single reputable stakeholder in the ecosystem to be a part of the community, like the community consortium, you will never be able to get the community to turn on itself, right? And it ends up becoming this flywheel, right? The more places that uses the community consortium for their consensus needs, right? And the more of even the users of the community consortium are part of the validator set in the community consortium, right? You just have this compounding flywheel effect. And that's what I'm kind of here today for, is I want to convince all of you to join this community consortium. I want you to help not just secure Maker, but I want you to help secure the entire ecosystem. So we can get away from these flimsy architectures that are based on multisigs and get towards this, and I know this sounds a bit utopian, but bear with me, right? Almost like a community-owned public utilities, right? That are powered by community consensus. So, if what I said today interests you and you want to join the MakerDAO Consortium, I would love to talk to you. Come find me here, or you can reach me on any of these socials, on Twitter, Telegram, shoot me an email. Also, if you're interested in working with Maker, we're always hiring talented individuals. It doesn't matter what you do, we just want the best people. So if that's of interest, please come find me, come hit me up. Let's talk. Awesome. Thank you very much.